Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Paper Gain Show. I'm Johnathan Rankin, joined by my co-host Matt Magee. Matt, what's going on?
Not much. How are you?
I
Good to be
am.
back.
I know it is good to be back. I apologize for last week. I was out of town, and as you know, with two small kids, you've got to take the trips when you can. Just because,
Yeah, absolutely.
to me, experiences are the big part of life, especially with young ones. And we've, as my wife and I, we've made a conscious decision to reduce the amount of gifts that we give and do more experiences. It's kind of funny because I saw something on social media. I don't know what platform, but they said, your kids are never going to remember a specific gift you get them, but they'll remember the
Yeah.
experiences. And so we've tried to really live by that. And so it's always fun to get away with the kids. And then when you get back,
Yeah,
it's almost like you need a vacation just to get back into the swing of things.
yeah. I think people call those trips, not vacations. But,
Yeah, that's true. It's almost like you really do need just a break once you get back, once the kids are back in camp or school, that you can just go, okay, let me just take a day and let me just breathe because, my daughter's about to be 7 and my son is 8 years old. So it's, almost a 7 and 8 year old. They are balls of energy. So it's a lot of
yeah.
fun, but I'm glad to be, catching back up. I know we've got a number of things we want to go through today, which the first one being, kind of dovetailing off the trip side or the vacation side, as you will, just, family finances. This is something where we've seen it through the course of our career. Different families manage finances differently. And we know that money is one of the top causes of divorce out there, and so just how couples can manage their finances in a way that doesn't create that conflict, especially, I think, was it because you had sent me an article from the Wall Street Journal that was talking about one spouse's spendings, up here, the other one's down here. So, I don't know if you want to kind of share a little bit more about that.
Yeah. I guess one, it's like many things in finance, especially personal finance. This is definitely one of those gray areas. I mean, there's no one size that fits all. I mean, there's probably what the textbooks will tell you, but then there's reality, and I would say that reality is figuring out what works best for both spouses, and figuring out if that's having separate bank accounts and kind of a community account for the mortgage, property taxes, insurance, things like that. I've definitely seen that. And then you almost have like a discretionary account for fun expenses that you never have to justify, or however you do it. That was a lot of what the article I sent you hit on.
Yeah.
But so I think it comes down to communication, kind of avoiding surprises, and just you might have somebody spending up here and somebody spending down here, but I think as long as there's mutual respect, that they don't get out of line over an extended period of time where this individual starts spending this individual's money. I feel like that's what leads to conflict and eventual divorce. What do you think? Have you seen?
There's when you have that discrepancy of spending, I think a lot of that is, comes down to, like you said, communication. But even let's say there is communication, and let's say someone out there is having that conversation with their spouse of, hey, we've got to cut back, and that cutback doesn't necessarily happen. Some of the ways that at least I know that I've helped people over the course of my career kind of, handle that challenge has been, let's go through some active planning, and let's actually, by doing a detailed financial plan and really digging into the spending, we can show how, the impacts long term of that overspend, whether that's, causing additional credit card usage, or I've seen it where spending it so bad you're taking loans out from 401ks. And so you show that impact over the course of time, and then you can kind of show the impact of, let's just say we right size. The hard part is, I think when we're dealing with individual psychology, especially in the world of the United States, where we are very good at spending money. I mean, we are the consumers of the world. We love to do it. And so it's hard to get someone to go from, hey, I'm spending on everything I want, to, okay, now I'm pinching pennies. But how do you show incremental steps and then being able to show that long term? Because what I found is that when someone in a relationship is the spender, they typically don't have that vision of what the long term looks like. When I say don't have the vision, I just mean they haven't done the plan to see the long term impacts of it. They might have a vision of, here's what I'd love the future to look like. I'd love to be able to retire and live comfortably and travel and do all those things. But I think with individuals like that, you really have to show that picture of, this is what that's doing to us. This is really the impact of that. This is causing us to, whether that's, not being able to send our kids to school, to college and pay for that, or it's delaying our retirement, or it's, causing us to not be able to travel as much. You have to show that the true impacts of that well in advance, because we know, and I don't know about you, but I've seen many cases where, when you have that discrepancy, and let's say you're able to get to retirement, well, a lot of that discretionary spending that you see happen, and that I've seen, is from people who have careers where maybe they're getting a large year-end bonus, or they're getting something that, maybe it's incentive compensation that is tied to a position, or stock options, you name it. That's not going to be there in retirement. And so now you have this state of spending is still happening, but those one-time influxes per year aren't happening, that are usually meant to pay off all the debt that was accumulated, or pay back the loan, or it's that cycle of, I get this large influx, I'm going to use that to pay off my credit cards, and then I'm going to build up the credit cards, and then I'm going to wait for the next big influx, I'm going to do that again. And so that's really what I've seen.
Yeah, I would say this is especially prevalent in high income or high earners, that you see incomes of 500,000 plus. They're very good at making money, terrible at saving or keeping track of the little things. They're just focused on money in and the big ticket items, like, oh, our $2 million mortgage is at a good rate. It doesn't matter. But then you look at it, and consumption is $30,000 a month, and way beyond just the mortgage and private school. Things just add up. But your example of, especially when it's tied to a large bonus or different things like that, that I've seen that a number of times, where you have these once a year, every 6 months, large influxes, debt and everything builds up, pay that off, property taxes, just big ticket items, and that cycle persists.
Yeah, and it's, and I get it. It's hard. This is where, when you see online, you see on social media, all the people that talk about, well, here's how you have to live your life, live on this budget, and then, that's just not how most people live. And I would argue that a lot of the people that are promoting that stuff on social media probably aren't living it by themselves, and that's, I think you have to figure out what works for you. I mean, I know, I tell clients all the time, like, I got a 7 and 8 year old. There are some times where I don't know what we're spending in the next month. There's like, my kids are they're in camp, and they need, they need a certain type of, shoe or a shirt or a bag or something like that is required for a certain camp they're doing. I'm getting my son into tennis camp. Well, got to go buy a tennis racket that I wasn't anticipating. There's just certain things that, over time will add up, and you go, well, that wasn't on my Excel sheet. That wasn't in my budget. So it's, it's trying to come up with that, like you said, that communication. That's where I really feel that it's that long-term planning that can really be beneficial if you're in that world where you're you're trying to figure out how to get your family finances, under control, and you just don't know where to start, I would start with the planning side, because I've seen it where it does impact retirement. Where you have, like what you had mentioned, maybe you have these separate accounts, you do have separate finances. And I've seen couples that have separate finances. They've got separate investment accounts, separate IRAs. But the problem is, what happens, and this has happened multiple times, what happens when the spending spouse draws out and spends down their balances? And now there's nothing left.
Yeah.
And now you go, okay, well, I finished all my food. Now I want some on your plate. And that's you don't want to get to that point in retirement, because it's really, I don't want to say it's too late, but it's very hard to change behavior at that point. But speaking on the retirement side, I think that's, obviously one part of retirement and one part of retirement income that is really important is Social Security. And we've talked about Social Security quite a bit. It's a big topic, on everybody's mind. But, there was that really good article in the Wall Street Journal that talked about how people are taking Social Security benefits prematurely, not out of necessity, not out of, hey, this is the best for my retirement plan, but really out of fear that the system's going to be changed and it's not going to be around. And that's something that I want to get your take on. If someone comes to you and they say, Matt, I want to take Social Security, I'm going to do it at 62 because I don't know if it's going to be there for me. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was kind of looking at the date, so the June 10th, but obviously 2025. If somebody's 62 and still working and comes to me and says that, I'm going to push back a little bit and at least explain the reasons why they shouldn't, and try to educate and kind of get a better feel for their understanding of Social Security. If somebody's retired and 62 and you kind of have a complete picture of their balance sheet, their spending, any other income sources, different things like that, same thing. I mean, just making sure they understand exactly what they're doing. And I would say, I don't know how successful I've been in talking somebody out of it, just because I'm sure, like you, some people have very strong opinions about Social Security. Earlier in my career, I would try to convince them otherwise. I've kind of gone the opposite direction on this one, and it's more just, okay, I understand that, just want to make sure you understand the implications of that, and as long as they go into it eyes wide open, then it's their benefit, they work for it, go for it.
Yeah, but isn't that the same? Couldn't you say the same thing for, hey, I want to, I feel like the market's going to fall, and so therefore put me all in cash. I mean, it's kind of the same thing where you don't know the future. You're using a judgment as to, hey, this is what I think is going to happen, so therefore I want to do this extreme action. I mean, that's kind of what's happening, just in a different format. And so, I don't know, but like for me, I take a very different approach. I see so many, I mean, just you Google retirement mistakes, and I guarantee you every single list is going to have taking Social Security early. Here's the problem with that being a mistake. And I get that, if you're taking Social Security at 62 because, you've got health issues, you don't know if you're going to have longevity in your family, if you're taking it because that income will actually allow you to, to have more flexibility with the other assets you have, and you're taking it for a really good reason, that's one thing. That's okay.
Yeah.
This isn't, saying, hey, you've got to take Social Security at full retirement or at 70, and it's the only way you're going to have a successful retirement. I think if you're taking it for the right reasons, that's fine. But I will push back on anybody who says that it's a mistake, because, okay, first of all, if you're 90 years old, are you really analyzing a decision that you made 28 years ago, saying, man, I really wish that, 28 years ago I didn't take Social Security? I can't think of a decision that I made 14 years ago that I would go, that was just a horrible, life-changing decision. You're 90 years old analyzing a 28-year-old decision. Like, who's doing that, first of all?
Yeah.
Second of all, I do think if you're taking Social Security out of fear, it is something that you want to reconsider, because, I think you have to look at what the news is telling you, because news is always going to be headline driven of Social Security is going away, it's going bankrupt. There's so many different levers that they can pull to fund Social Security. So even if nothing changes, as we've talked about before, come 2035, Social Security can pay out about 80% of scheduled benefits. So no matter what, it's not going away. So you're at least going to get 80% of what your benefits are. Yeah. So if you're delaying your Social Security, well, by taking it at 62 versus full retirement, you're already taking a 32% cut. So why not just delay it and only take a 20% cut if we're going to use that logic? So then that's the first thing. Second thing is that's assuming that they're not going to use any of these other mechanisms, whether that's just raising the cap on Social Security income, so that way
there are plenty of levers to pull. I agree 100%, and that's kind of where that education piece comes in, and kind of figuring out what the intent is, and if this is a decision out of fear. Just like your market example, it's never good to make big financial decisions from a position of fear, but people do it all the time.
Happens. I mean, and it happens all the time. Look at that. My light goes out in here. Gotta love that. It's always fun. Okay, we're doing it. We're keeping it going. So
keep it rolling.
Yep, that's what happens. When you have automated lights and things are supposed to be. Isn't AI supposed to help us with that to make sure that everything stays on? I mean, see, this is why we're not there yet with technology, but no, I do think that to make a Social Security decision to do anything finance related based on fear it's easy to do and it's easy to think of. Obviously the market side of it is one thing, but I can think of so many examples where people are nervous about something, but there are times where they don't let that actually impact their decision making, because during the crash of 2020 with COVID, I guarantee you a lot of people were fearful about the market. Everybody was, but most people, I would say most people on average didn't make many major shifts to their portfolio, even though that they were nervous about it. There's so many times where the tariff situation we just went through.
Yeah.
I mean, we saw multiple days. I mean, how fast was that? From all-time highs, to the point where we almost touched bear market territory in the S&P. That was lightning fast.
I think we did. It was down 20%.
I think it was, I don't know, 19 point some odd percent.
I guess wasn't the NASDAQ down much more?
Yeah, but it's. What is the index nowadays? Is it the NASDAQ? Is it the Is it the S&P? Or is it the People's Index of the Dow Jones Industrial Average? I don't know.
Yeah, I know for certain it is not the Dow.
I don't know why. I guess because the Dow, when I got into this business, it was so prevalent of that was what a lot of people looked at, because it was, it's your blue chips, it's your, the 30, just, kind of the staples. And a lot of the clients I worked with, were working for companies in the Dow. So the Dow is always what people had attributed to the market, but so that's why I call it the People's Index. But no, so if you're just a couple takeaways, what would you, let's go back to the spousal discussion around finances. What would you tell someone who is, maybe struggling that within their own household? How do you start getting that under wraps? What are some action items that you can do to at least start having those conversations?
Yeah, I think that communication, proactive planning, and getting some sort of plan, even if it's not a pseudo financial plan, in place, and then figure out kind of where that underlying tension is, and obviously work to resolve that tension, and then go on to the next thing, and then obviously as you're nearing and planning for retirement, making sure that if one spouse is the spender, that spending is not affecting any sort of savings goals that in turn are affecting retirement. And is that like what is driving that spending? Is that going to persist into retirement, or is there a time frame, if you will, around that?
Yeah.
So I think all of those things are just different factors to consider. And one thing we didn't really hit on, especially that came to mind, was when talking about separate finances, is spouses in a second marriage where you're coming into it with potentially way more assets than if you're getting married in your mid-20s and you're at the beginning of that journey. I've seen that happen a lot where, especially investment accounts, different things like that, are often kept separate, sweeping dividends and interest into a joint. Any new money's going into the joint account, different things like that. But at the end of the day, just kind of proactive communication and keeping everybody on the same page. And even more than a budget, if you will, it's just kind of ground rules, or like a respect and understanding of kind of where the money's going. And then you don't have to talk about it. Then it's like oxygen. It's just in the background. That's at least how I've seen it work pretty well.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. I tend to think that it's, a little bit, if you're at that point where there is a massive spending difference and there's a spending gap, it's probably been talked about. It's probably been fought about. It's probably been discussed. This isn't, you just don't go from, hey, we're at where everything's fine, to, oh, now we have one big blow up, you're spending too much money, things are over. There's never, it's always this gradual, hey, this has probably been talked about before. So it's, there's, at this point, when you're getting to the point where, there is a massive difference in beliefs, you're kind of, you really are dealing with fundamental beliefs of who people are. And that's where, you've got to do, I don't want to call them extreme things, but that's where, counseling might come into play to help, having a third party talk about these things, working with a financial planner to make sure that at least you're planning for the future together, and you're able to at least look at things as, okay, let's articulate what our goals are, and let's talk about our current state, let's talk about our future state, and you've got to, I think you really have to paint that picture of what that future looks like if you continue that behavior. But I unfortunately, I think, this is just my opinion, I think it might be past the, hey, let's have a talk about this. Because I guarantee that the talks have probably happened. It's.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if I think about it, like if I went to Eddie V's every day for lunch, and then you have another spouse eating at home, that can go on for about a day or two before there's a conversation.
So, question for you: Do you and your wife, do you guys have like a limit of, okay, hey, if a purchase is above a certain amount, let's talk about it. Anything under that, I don't want to hear about it. Do you guys do anything like that?
There's no hard and fast number, but I think it's just, I mean, it just depends. Like, it's kind of all over. Like, certain things she just gets, and I feel like, kind of like you, most of the stuff you're getting at this age is kid related, outside of like birthdays and holidays. So like my consumption, if you will, has drastically gone down.
I would love to say that my consumption's gone down. I mean, I think it has. It just now it's almost like I'm a binge spender. It's like you've heard of binge drinking. It's like, you just go through spurts of like, okay, I'm going to be really tight with things, and then all of a sudden I'm just going to spend without thinking.
Yeah.
But it's never on just stuff. And it's funny because I'm trying to think of what Melissa and I do, and I think for the most part, I would say it's probably around like, I would say maybe non-grocery store. It's probably around $125, $150 of like, if it is, because what's going to cost you $200, $300 that it's like, you're going to show up at home and go, oh, hey, by the way, I've got, I've got this new whatever it is. Like, you're probably going to, at least, it's not like you're asking for permission, but it's like, hey, I'm thinking about getting this. But I can't think of anything that would be like, I don't know. But I'm also simple. Like, I'm not showing up in, with a new pair of Gucci shoes or anything like that. It's not like, I don't know, but that's just me. But okay, let's wrap it up on the Social Security side. What are some ways that you think people should at least start planning for Social Security? And really, when they're thinking about, or if they are fearful that the system's not going to be there, how would you handle that, and how should someone at least think about that conceptually if they're in that camp that is a little worried that it's not going to be there for them?
Yeah, I would acknowledge the worry. I would try to all the things you hit on. Like I would say, like in all likelihood, I do not believe it's materially going away for somebody that's 55 and above. I mean, I think, could it be very different for you and I? Yeah, I mean, entitlements are 60-70% of the government budget if you include interest expense. So yeah, it's a tremendous expense. That's a separate discussion that we've hit on before, but we could do an episode each week on that. I would hit on trying not to make decisions from fear, but kind of acknowledge, like, I totally understand if you want to do this. Here are the impacts of that. What does that look like from a financial plan? Does that help you keep your assets invested and growing? If so, then maybe it makes sense. Maybe you don't. Maybe longevity isn't on your side, and you're you're happy to live to 75. Like that's logical, and that happens all the time. And so I would just walk somebody through that conversation. What about you?
Yeah, I think it really is thinking about it logically, because what I've found is that people who are worried that Social Security aren't going to be there for them, it's because they're seeing headlines and are not actually thinking through the side of what is it going to take to actually get there. Like let's fast forward. Let's really think about what has to happen for Social Security to go away, and let's go through the scenario of, let's say it does. What does that look like for everybody? And I think as you go through that, most people realize that Social Security going away really isn't feasible, because of how many people rely on it. So then we start talking about changes, and and then obviously you're speculating on a lot of this stuff. But I think, to me, it's kind of like the same thing. And I know we've touched on this before, of someone who comes to me and says, "I'm thinking about putting all my money in physical gold." And you go, well, okay, let's talk about that. Why? I'm scared of the dollar, scared of the debt, scared of all this stuff. But then let's take it that next step further, and let's actually go through, what does life look like if we get to a point where you have to rely on gold as your currency? I think nobody necessarily does that second level of thinking. It's usually that first level of, this, I saw a headline, I read the story, this is what the news is telling me. Now let's execute on the fear. Whereas, let's pause for a second, let's take a step further, and let's actually play this out. Like I said, if you're taking a 32% pay cut because you're scared of a 20% pay cut, does that logic really make sense? And so those are the things that I would push back on, and I really try to get people to see that side of it. And then ultimately, Social Security is a personal decision, because the reality is we don't know what the right decision is until we know when you're going to die, and we just don't know that number. So,
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
I try to help people make sure that they're seeing it from a logical perspective, but at the same time, because I don't know if they're right or wrong. I mean, like I said, we don't know if taking it at 62, you could pass away at 68. We just don't know. And then it would have been more beneficial for you to take it at 62. And I also do know, I've never, like I said, I've never met anybody in their 80s and 90s who's actually said the words, "Oh man, I really wish I would have taken Social Security at 70." It's not even a thought in their mind. So I just think that, like I said, can you think of any decisions that you made 14 years ago that you're like, man, that really messed up my life. I really wish that I not did that one.
Yeah.
So that's just my take, but you know, anyway.
Good place to end it.
Yep, that's a fun one. Well, Matt, it was good chat with you again. I'm glad we were able to get back to it, and looking forward to next week.
Sounds good. I'll see you then.
I'll see you then.